Okay, so you know the session is about what has released, what's next, correct? And before I start, let's keep it light so that we have 2 more minutes for people to join in. So so before me telling about myself, I love to play this game called I'm Standing Because I Am a. Okay. So what is the game is that I would ask you, let's say for example, I'm standing because I am a developer. So you have to stand. I am a infra, you have to stand. And then others have to sit too. Okay, so ready to play this game? Okay, awesome. Okay, so I am standing because I am a developer, a SharePoint developer. Awesome. Okay, I am standing because I am from SharePoint Infra. Okay. I am standing because I was the one who was working with SharePoint 2007. Okay. I'm standing because I am from SharePoint 2010. 2001, awesome. Okay, I am standing because I loved feature framework, the WSPs. I worked with WSP. Okay, you have worked with WSP, okay. I could make some reference there. I am standing because I am very new to modern framework, SharePoint framework. Okay, I am standing because I am an open source developer. Open source developer. Yes. Node.js, React. Okay. I'm standing because I am a .NET developer, true .NET developer. Okay. And I'm standing because I've worked with Node.js, React, Gulp, Yo, JavaScript. I'm standing because I've worked with HTML and JavaScript. Okay, we have a very mixed audience and it would be, okay, so I will try to tender the, okay. So things have changed. Things have changed from SharePoint, correct? Before starting with the, before starting up the agenda, I just want to give you the things, the people who have been developing with either 2001, 2003, 2007, actually 2003, 2007, 2010, 2013, okay? It's a total paradigm shift now in SharePoint Online, correct? You used to, might be people who would remember they used to create WSPs using DDF files, okay? And these DDF files were handwritten files, okay? That you used to write in a Notepad or Notepad++. So there were times like that, and now is a time where you have NPM generators that automatically scaffolds your project and builds it and runs it. Okay, then came the WSPs. When the WSPs were there, it was installed in a server, correct? So once it was installed in a server, your web parts, your web pages were hosting up, correct? Using SharePoint on-premise. I'm talking about the SharePoint on-premise world in 2007, 2010. And then came up the time for 2010, which was similar. 2013, Microsoft came up with the SharePoint add-ins, okay? Okay, one more. I'm standing because I worked with SharePoint add-in. Okay, so there was, okay, to give you all the context is, SharePoint add-ins were something where you could communicate with SharePoint data, the SharePoint list, and what you could get is you could authenticate using OAuth 2.0 basically. So how the earlier communication method in the server model was different was the code was directly running in the form of DLL or bin. directly in your IS or in your GAC, and the code was running there, correct? But when the SharePoint Online model came up, you didn't have server. You had to communicate with the server or the SharePoint Online, and you were in the client model, so you could not run DLL. So you had to be authenticated, and authenticating using username and password was a very wrong way, correct? So SP add-in came up. Then there was a shift. In 2015, the model dropped. SharePoint was not the portal technologies it was there when it started. 2007, people might remember, it was the only portal technology and a very successful portal technology. But suddenly, 2015, 2016 saw a drop in SharePoint. The reason, anyone can get a reason? Why did a portal technology drop? With coming off of, Okay, the reason was when we used to develop a product against SharePoint, we used to make sure that it is the portal. Okay, when I say portal, that means it is the entry point for everyone. If you want to go to your vacation application, if you want to go to news feeds, it was the portal. I would say contoso.com, and I would land into a page customized where I can see news, I can see CEO announcements, I can see various things. Okay, but in the time of, I know I'm kind of giving you a GAN, but it would be better for you to understand why we are coming up with different stuffs. Okay, so what happened was in 2013, so there was a drop, and the drop was because we didn't have that portal now. Now the portal for Office 365 or SharePoint Online was portal.office.com. So anyone user who used to go into there used to go by portal.office.com and not by tenant.sharepoint.com, which changed it, correct? Which changed it. Then there was drop because also the world changed, the technology changed. Okay, how did the technology change? When SharePoint was developed, it was developed in a time. It actually, if you know, guys, SharePoint actually came up from something called a product called Front Page. If you know about Front Page, correct? It was then came up to Office servers, and from Office servers, then it came up to be the SharePoint it is. Once upon a time, it was also called Microsoft Office SharePoint Server, correct? The 2007 one and WSS also, which was very confusing at that moment of time. Okay, coming back. So now technology changed. People wanted more responsive UI, correct? Whatever they wanted to access in their laptops or in their computers, they also wanted to access the same look and feel in a mobile, okay? So there was various changes came up, and then changes within Microsoft also came up, okay? So we came up to say that, okay, we are not totally supporting Microsoft technologies. We are coming up with a MVC model, MVVM model, but we also want the open source developers to come to us and develop for us, okay? So that's where the SharePoint whole started changing up, and it was a gradual process. Development requires a lot of time, correct? And then setting it up and developing for it did take up a lot of time. So people still didn't knew that should I be using classic experience or should I be using modern experience? If I'm using modern experience, there are things that are not available. If I'm using classic experience, the things will go off. So what should I do, okay? And here are some sets. I would have to unhide some slides because we do not also have some users, some SharePoint developers, and they are very new. So we would be also covering a dev part, a bit of. Agreed? Okay, how to get started kind of thing, okay? So what we would be talking about would be SharePoint overview, SharePoint developer landscape, SharePoint frameworks, where we would be talking about web parts, extensions, app pages, and what else came up. We would be talking about Microsoft Graph and Flow, how it is that integrated, and how do you use site designs, which is one of the important component of site designs, okay? So let's, now, when you have introduced yourself and I have introduced SharePoint, so let me also introduce myself. So I am Abhishek Purohit. Everyone normally calls me AB, okay? So I work as a partner technical consultant. So you as a partner, if you are a Microsoft partner, you can reach out to me and say that, okay, I'm new to SharePoint, please enable me, please let me understand, or I have these challenges. And I also can help you out on that. Otherwise, so let's get started with this. So what do we have? Okay, to getting started with people who who do not have much experience, we have when we have SharePoint, we have something called site experience. Correct? Users can create their own sites and customize it according to how they want it. Okay, maybe if you have SharePoint, you want to have a different look and feel or different web parts available for someone for your HR department. You might want to have different kind of understanding or different kind of level permissions for HR. Now, I know there might be level 300 people also, and they might find it very boring, but we have some new people over here too, so let's accommodate for everyone. Okay, so we could build different kind of applications and this would be their portal for their departments. Okay, one thing that has been changed now is that SharePoint, with earlier design SharePoint, you could just create SharePoint. But now when you create any Microsoft Teams or when you create SharePoint, you could associate a team with it. Okay, and that's where you could collaborate between both Microsoft Teams and SharePoint. Now people would ask, what's the use of it? What would be the benefit of it? When you are having, so coming back, when we had SharePoint as a portal technology, and now we do not, Microsoft Teams was released. And it is one place where you could get all the information either from different LOB systems which you were able to. So you could build applications and we would see how Teams and SharePoint are tightly integrated. When you are building something for SharePoint, it could also be used for your Microsoft Teams. Now coming back to the integration part, we used to build a lot of, we use different kinds of tools or different kind of informations, and we want to sync it to SharePoint. SharePoint not only works as your document management system or DMS, it is also your EMS, correct? It is enterprise management system or your content management system, where you can have articles updated, where you can have documents uploaded. But it also can also integrate with different kinds of tools and applications. And you would ask that how it is done. You could actually use Microsoft Flows and Power Apps and connect it with different surfaces. You could build something called Office Connectors, and you could note that down. Office Connectors, you can build or you can get information from different systems into SharePoint, leveraging SharePoint as a data surfacing area. Then, not only that, but you could also build different kind of processes. As easy as this sounds, it is easy, correct? There was one of my partners. We developed a vacation application in just 3 hours, okay, which was as simple as a user requesting a vacation from his manager. He didn't have to enter his manager. The manager information automatically comes from his Azure AD, and then an approval mail is sent to his manager. And once manager approves, it automatically deducts its mail, and it used 2 lists and Microsoft Flows to do the job. And if you were part of my earlier session on actionable messages, I mentioned that Microsoft Flows sends the information as part of actionable message as part of approval process. So in the same way, there are different process and workflows, but you can also build highly sophisticated applications using business applications. And for that, we have something called App Pages, which we have released. So if you as a developer would remember the 2007 folks who, so there was this small hack that every .NET developer used to do. And it was a hack where he didn't know much of SharePoint. He just learned the dynamic library. Okay, and what he used to do was he used to put that particular page, which is a customized .NET page, into underscore layout 50 underscore layouts folder. Do you remember that? Okay, and then if they used to just add it over there, and it was accessible there. The reason that why they wanted to do that was they wanted to use the feature of authentication and authorization of SharePoint, and then features like list and libraries of SharePoint, but really didn't wanted to know the exact pillars of SharePoint, because SharePoint is a floating architecture where you can get details from SharePoint search, everything, but then. So in the similar lines, we also thought that there would be developers who would want to develop app pages which does not have the customization of SharePoint, where he does not want to edit, where he does not want to add much of a content. It should just show the app itself, like a vacation app. So there is something called app pages that came up. So we would be talking about this. So now, with the developer landscape, what I really want to talk about is how SharePoint is different, correct? We have something called the EMS features with SharePoint, correct? So the normal, when you use SharePoint, you can use it for your normal day-to-day things like having communication site, having a team site where you are uploading up a document. That is where you can have the SharePoint site built into it. But then, if you want to really customize it, get details, so there are two layers for it, okay? One of the layers is your presentation layer. The presentation layer is really where you develop stuff. Anyone question? Questions? So there are only two parts that when the audience does not ask questions. Nobody understood nothing, or everyone understood everything, or third could be the session is boring, but you just laughed, so I don't think so that is the case. Okay, but then then we have web parts and extensions, which we would be talking about how you can develop web parts and extensions around SharePoint. But then we have different applications, like we have released something like Microsoft Teams tab can be hosted in SharePoint. So that is the presentation layer which I'm talking. Then you also have something like how you can have Power Apps. People working on Power Apps, just raise hands. Okay. So how they can integrate Power Apps into SharePoint. When I say integrate Power Apps into SharePoint, that means that they can have the whole canvas layer of Power Apps directly into Microsoft Pages. So if you have built application, that can be integrated directly. Also, they can customize the list using Power Apps. Okay, so that is the other layer. Then you have extensions. The part where extensions came up was because the SharePoint layout had completely changed. You had the left navigation, you had the top navigation, correct? And the top URL part where you could see image, site logos, and URLs. And that was just hard-coded, correct? The top part was, so only content page or the content area was customizable, where you could add add-ins, web parts, and have different kinds of layouts. So only this was available, correct? What was different then? How could you actually add more content? If you want to have your own navigation, third navigation or fourth navigation, how can you add that? And that was built on the part of extensions. So extensions are something like where you run a particular JavaScript. Okay, and when you run this particular JavaScript, it runs on that particular page, finds that element and adds it. Then you could have extensions like modifying your list. If you have a percentage, okay, you could show a progress bar instead of that, which we would be seeing in the demos. Now there was logical layers, correct? Okay, think about this as I'm building up an application, and this where I would be showing you, I would be also giving you up a mindset where how SharePoint can be used. Okay, so think about this. I have a team. Okay, you all also would be having up a team, and in this particular team, there are birthdays and anniversaries stored. Correct? of all the team members of you have. And so what you might be used to do earlier was have an Excel sheet where all the anniversaries and birthdays were stored. You check every day, basically, if it's some person's birthday or you might remember, and then marking the whole team, send up a mail to that person, correct? A very simple objective to just wish him. Now, think about this as this. I have a SharePoint list where all of my members marked. Few of you just take your name. Any name. Take your name.
Peter.
Peter? Okay, so I have Peter. His birthday is tomorrow. That is March 21st. Okay, so I have to go into that SharePoint list to check. But can I build something like this where I have Microsoft Flow, okay, that is scheduled to run every day, okay? And what it does is whenever it runs every day, it checks of all the items in the list and says that checks whether today is birthday of any of us, okay? And then he finds that Peter has a birthday on 21st when it runs tomorrow. And when he runs tomorrow, it actually sends an email to all the members of that particular list, whoever are listed over there, and says, happy birthday, Peter, because it has identified that Peter was born tomorrow, okay? So, sorry, I've changed your date of birth. Okay, so, yeah, in that part, it's about the logic, correct? So when it's about the logic, you have different kinds of layers. You have flows or connectors which are going to SharePoint list and checking for items. So you have data that is available in SharePoint, okay? When you have data available, to access this data, developers would have to communicate to it. You will have to communicate with it. So if you have to communicate with it, you have the SharePoint APIs, you have Microsoft Graph for it to communicate and get the content out of it. But then you also have some things like remote event receivers and webhooks. So let's suppose, remember when I talked about that you have, that there is a vacation application, you want to build up a more customized application without using Microsoft Flows. So whenever an item is added into SharePoint, okay, let's suppose, or a vacation request is added into SharePoint list, and whenever the item is added, there should be some kind of a code trigger or Azure function that should be running, which I would be also showing you in the form of demo. So when that runs, some Azure function runs and does something, maybe sends up a mail or triggers up a Dynamics 365 portal. So that is called webhook. When it is any events that gets generated, if it is asynchronous, then it is called a webhook. But if it is synchronous or asynchronous, that is called remote event receivers in SharePoint. Okay. Now that is on the logic and processing part. But then you need to access this particular data. Get that? So how do I access this data? So we have APIs, that is Microsoft Graph, we have REST APIs, and we have CSOM, that is client-side object model. In earlier days, we used to also have something called server-side object model and sp.js, but sp.js runs in the custard of SharePoint add-in only, and that's why not much of it is used now. So now on the third part, we have something called deployment. Okay, so when we deploy, there could be two kinds of deployments, correct? So the one part of the deployment is you add your add-in to Office 365 store using AppSource or Office Seller Dashboard, and it is available to everyone. So who would really do that? It could be used by everyone on all of your companies. So this is mostly developed by someone called your ISVs that develops their own thing. Okay, so we have then SharePoint framework. So basically in Office 365, if you store it, your customers can directly purchase it from Office 365 depending upon the licensing that you put, which is the Microsoft licensing framework that they have. But then if it is a LOB application that you are building up for your customers, as easy as any LOB application that you can think of and hosting it in SharePoint, you can have that available for your customers, for your SharePoint customers as a tenant. Okay, so that's how easy it is. But think about this, that so there are two kinds of sites, or actually three kinds of sites. So there is hub site, there is team site, and there is a communication site. But I want to build up a department site for all my customers. Okay, so my customer has number of members, and what it does is, basically whenever I create up a particular site, it should have predefined list available in that. Okay, so if it has predefined list available with predefined data and document libraries, it is not easy to develop. Okay, earlier we used to use something called site definition and site templates, but now, so that is all done by, give me a second guys. So that all can be done by site designs, and we will be talking about that. So how you can have a site design. Just if you want to do that for some of your customers, do note that term. That is kind of a new release feature. So if you talk about SharePoint, what you understand with the SharePoint is what you see over in SharePoint over here in the web, you would also see that particular feature over your mobile. It is readjusted depending upon which tile it is. Okay, so if there are two news that are coming up, or if there are different tiles, it would readjust itself, not making it smaller, but readjust depending upon which media type it is. Okay, so let's suppose if I'm using a Tableau, which is a bigger screen, it would readjust and come down. Okay, instead of you to scroll it, because what we learned with different kind of devices, that it is very hard for the users to scroll horizontally. Though in between we came up with the windows where you could scroll it like this, but then with the devices, what we felt was it is very easy for users to navigate it vertically. That's what about the UI design. Now, one of the things with the SharePoint framework that you need to understand is that SharePoint framework is just the client-side solution. So if you are just a HTML or JavaScript developer, okay, you can interact with different kind of LOB systems or Microsoft Graph and get the data to your portal. So it would surface that data. Whereas in the SharePoint add-in, you could write up some server kind of code or managed code which will do a particular process. But in the SharePoint framework, when you're developing, it is more of a rendering technology over your SharePoint, whether it is the device or whether it is your portal. Now, one thing you need to also understand is the feature that how we came up with SharePoint is, if you install your SharePoint app, okay, because it's the world of app, you don't have to go to browser again and again. So if you install the SharePoint app, what you see over the portal or what you see over the mobile device in the browser, you would see the same thing. So whatever we are rendering as a HTML or JavaScript, you would see the same thing in your mobile app experience also. Okay, so it is not different at all. So now, when we have the SharePoint, we have already talked about it, where I've coughed a lot, that it is, I should have taken that for later, but where we had, so we talked about the user experience, that there are different kinds of client-side web parts. And here where I was asking, where I was talking about, these three things, if you see, I could use this, these three things that you could use, okay? These things are basically where you need to use open source development. Because when you are building with the client-side web parts or site and list, basically the list extensions or the modern page canvas, you need to use React, okay? I would not exactly say React, you could use JavaScript, but you at least have to have Node.js, okay? So the 2007 guys who were here, okay, and they are just falling back again to SharePoint, there is a learning curve. You need to understand Node.js. And I started like 2 years ago. When it started, it took time. So don't worry, even everyone takes time to get used to it. It will take time. It would take time for you to learn TypeScript, but it's as a developer, I would always say, and as a technologist, I would always say, you need to have yourself updated. If you're not being updated and you want to fall into the last technology, that would not happen because technology keeps changing. So there is a learning curve with SharePoint framework, but it's okay. Okay. So then we have packaging and deployment. Now there is a new thing that came up in the packaging and deployment stuff is anyone over here Microsoft Teams developer? Apps? Microsoft Teams developer? Okay, awesome. So one of the things is there was a different packaging system for Microsoft Teams where you could upload it. Okay, now the packaging and deployment are in such a way that that you could install your Microsoft Teams tab even in SharePoint by just using that particular package. So you do not have to create that package again. You can just drag and drop that Microsoft Teams package in SharePoint app catalog, and once you drop it, it would automatically work out. The configuration also works is people did not start developing for SharePoint also was that SharePoint used Azure hosting for hosting of the SharePoint pages, correct? For these SharePoint pages or SharePoint JavaScript library. Now we have enabled Office 365 related CDN. So if you just turn the include client-side solution, client-side support, it would automatically add the related JavaScript files in SharePoint itself. You do not need Azure anymore. Okay, so it is SharePoint CDN-based hosting, and then tenant-scoped deployment means if you install your app directly in your app catalog and say that it should be available for everything or all the sites, it would be available. Then if you are accessing certain reports, which is isolated web parts that came in, okay, you could note this isolated web parts. Just an important one. You could access certain APIs directly in the hindrance. Just a scenario, okay? You have developed the Azure, not a function, but a Azure App Services, and it is encrypted or it is authorized by Azure AD, okay? And so if you wanted to access this data, you would have to create up a Azure AD app and then do a OAuth code flow, whole of it, and then you would be able to access that data, correct? So in that term, it was very tough for the SharePoint developers to actually have a web API and have it authenticated. So then we have something called tenant scoped, which is basically also called isolated web parts, where your app services would be actually running in would be running as an iframe in the page, but it also can get authenticated directly via Azure AD. So there are two parts to it where you could authenticate directly to Microsoft Graph and get the information, or you could show the whole app services page, which is hosted in your Azure App Services, authenticated by your Azure AD as directly as a SPFX web part. Now, okay, this is important, and so, okay, this is okay. People say that SharePoint framework. I didn't believe this data, but that the SharePoint framework actually increased the growth of SharePoint. But I did talk to a few of the program managers, and I asked why this 11x number is. Why did the development so much started? But I had a long learning curve. It took me almost a month with a hard learning to learn all of the tools. Okay, so the reason he said that was that more and more open source developers are now starting to develop for SharePoint. Okay, because they have already developed it, they knew the tools, so it was much more easier for them, and it was just only about a part of learning SharePoint. What are lists, what are libraries, what is EMS features, and they were easily. So it has increased the growth of it. Now, is the most interesting part which I wanted to, for all the developers around SharePoint 2007 or before that, or even people who are just developing around .NET, okay, what should they expect around that? So if you are just a Azure, but not Azure, let's say a .NET website developer or ASP.NET developer, what does each SharePoint framework components or the tools actually means? So when you have IS Express, okay, or your IIS website or your IIS, it basically is your node.js. It's the server, it's the tools that it is. Then if you or .NET, it's your node.js. Node.js, if you do not know, it is your server side based on the JavaScript. So if you are a JavaScript developer, it would be very easy for you to start developing with node.js. You just need to know JavaScript and nothing much more. Then NuGet packages. NuGet packages, everyone know, they are how we used to have DLLs. We still have that in front of and in format of NuGet, but it quickly installed it by npm install package. So we have that NuGet package as npm. Then MS Build is your gulp, basically the building factory, which actually builds all your details or all your DLLs. Here it is gulp. Then instead of C#, we have TypeScript. TypeScript is, if you think about the JavaScript, and think about JavaScript as not semi-functional scripted language is what I call JavaScript. So if you do not think about it as a way of semi-functional scripted language, and think more about in the concept of OOPS, then you get TypeScript. So when I say OOPS concept, that means classes and objects. If you think about that, that would be TypeScript, okay, where you have all the features of OOPS. But then it is when it builds out in the format of, again, a functional-based language. So you could use something like, basically it uses something like prototype to create these functions. Then Visual Studio project templates. Well, you know how easy it is to start with a project. You say new and select a particular project. So here you have something called Yeoman. If you say yo@Microsoft/SharePoint, automatically the project gets started. Then instead of Visual Studio Code, instead of Visual Studio, we still have Visual Studio where you can build your projects using Visual Studio. So if you are a Visual Studio subscriber, you can still use Visual Studio and all of these tools. But there is a lightweight studio again available, which is Visual Studio Code. Okay, so or you could use an editor of your choice, but I will give you a reason why it is much more easier for you to use Visual Studio, because debugging these SharePoint projects are very much easier in your Visual Studio. Okay, so then we have people who are new, web parts are the similar things. It's the similar technology. It is not a similar technology that we used to have in SharePoint 2007, okay? And web parts, for everyone of you to understand, is it is part of a web, okay? So it is part of a web means in .NET earlier times, we used to have special built web parts which would also have properties sections, and these properties can be stored directly in that web part, so that you could think about that. I can build a web part, okay, where I want to show the birthdays of upcoming birthdays or all the birthday, okay, and I have just customized it with one radio button, okay, but the radio button is not shown, okay. So if you edit the web part and go to web part properties, okay, you select which particular web part it is. And depending upon that, you would either just have upcoming birthdays or all the birthdays. Now, so basically these are the building blocks. We still have that property, but not as a web part property section. The architectural design is very much different. So let's start with a web part demo, or we can complete up the web parts demo again with the extensions. Okay, now we have something called extensions. Okay, earlier if you wanted to apply applications to SharePoint, or apply extensions or want to extend SharePoints, we did not have much choice around that. As I said, your left hand and your right hand was not, you could not customize that, only the web part or the content section. So now if you want to customize it, we have extensions where you can add different kinds of elements at the top and at the left-hand navigation or at the footer. And that is done by your extensions. Then you have something called command set. So if you would have used command sets, you could, when you go to your SharePoint list, the top row over the navigation is your command sets. correct? So where you could click on a particular button and that button would do that particular job for you, like opening up a view item or an edit item or maybe sharing it. So you can apply your own command sets, and then you have a field customizer. So field customizer is something where you could, instead of 1 to 5, you could show the rating, okay, like stars. So if already a number 5 is applied, you could show 5 stars, and that can be customized using your field customizer. Okay. Now extending it, sorry. Now is the newer stuff that comes in, and we will see all of that together. So we have something called dynamic data. Dynamic data, that means this is the new stuff that is just released on this, which is GA now. It was released in Jan, Feb. So we have dynamic data now, okay? Dynamic data, you can think about it as connected web parts. The connected web parts means you have one particular web part that will take the data from the other web part. So if you do certain stuff like clicking on a button, it would send the information to a different web part. So that would be a connected web part. Okay, this is called dynamic data over here. And then this particular second web part can send information. So if you see, what I've done is, this is not a particular page. This is 3 different web parts. We have 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so if I clicked over there, automatically the information came from a different list. And when I saw that, also the event location is shown to me in a Google map. Okay, so that is dynamic data. Then the newer okay, so then we have isolated web parts. So basically, you could add security to your web part. It is mostly like an iframe. I've already talked about it. It is mostly that you could add up your Azure AD security, so that whenever you are bringing up the data from different APIs which are secured by your Azure AD, you do not have to create different kinds of web. You do not have to create up a different Azure AD. Your tenant scope, your isolated web parts will take care of it. And the isolated web parts are still in the preview mode. So it can get connected to any REST-based API depending upon its authentication type. If it does not have authentication, it's the same web part. You're just displaying the data from the web part. So now you have, okay, this is an interesting one, which is app pages basically. And what happens with the app pages is that you have all the content, okay, but you do not want to have EMS flexibility, which means you do not want anyone to have the editing capability or the wiki capability so that they can add a particular web part. It should just show one information which is constant, which could be dynamic in nature, but is constant for everyone, and nobody should be able to add it. Things like, if I want to show my vacation requests, what are the requests that I've applied would be different for everyone, correct? But then it is getting that data from different database, correct? And showing it. So having up a edit capability over there does not make a sense. Having up a publish component does not make a sense over there. And that's why we have the app pages. SharePoint subscriptions, basically. Okay, so you know about the notifications, correct? Notifications like, and the notifications, everything, okay, how do I tell that? I'm just thinking about a different example. So let's suppose if I have updated a particular document, okay? I do have the co-authoring feature of Word, where I'm editing a particular document. And once I'm editing that particular document, I am only able to edit that particular part of paragraph. And the second one is updated by second one, so he can just have that 2 different web parts editing by the same user. But if I was just editing it and I was landing into a pages of app pages or in Microsoft Teams, whenever someone updated a particular document, if I can get a notification about that, which was not possible earlier, if I can get a notification that there was someone or a policy document was updated by HR, and a notification arrives you in Microsoft Teams or in your Power Apps tool, okay, wouldn't that be great? And that could be done something by a list subscription. Did you understand the concept of list subscription? Yeah? So think about this, that we all have HR department sites where we have all the policies kept, correct? Now, whenever a new policy is being created, that would be handled by webhook, correct? Or event receiver, that new policy has been added, correct? And think somehow you also connected it with Microsoft Teams, that a notification appears. It is like a follow, correct. But you are not following it at all. Okay, we have hard-coded and built up a functionality that whenever a document is added, you get a notification. Okay, that is one part. But let's suppose there is an existing policy document. Okay, and there was no practical way earlier. If you used to update that particular policy document, you get a notification around it. Get that?
You know, like in the old time, you've got a WhatsApp on a list, and then when you're alert, like somebody added your document.
Added your document, or
It's the same thing.
it is added or edited, the list item was there, but updating up a particular document, you still get a notification. That was the part. Okay, yeah. So think about that is not web part properties, but the document has been updated as a whole such. Document properties. Yeah, if you have the version enabled. If you do not have the version enabled. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, you would have the list subscription. Also, having that in SharePoint web part was not possible. You could also understand it in the term of that refreshing the. We have something called JavaScript start time, correct? That the page automatically refreshes and gets the content from it. Okay, that every time it refreshes and then gets the content that it fetches. But what happens is the whole page refresh happens. So it is for that SPFX that your page does not refresh and you still get the notification that something changed. Okay, so it is about that in the UI format. Then we also have the MS Graph client and the AAD HTTP client. Before that, to get the context in SharePoint, we have something called SP HTTP client, where you can directly get the context of what the user is, what user property it is doing. Then we have something called MS Graph client. So we had the MS Graph client in .NET. So if you want to bring certain information from Microsoft Graph or wants to do certain functionality with Microsoft Graph, you can directly use this MS Graph client and do that functionality. Think about that you have just saved an item and you want to send up an email, okay? And or maybe click on a particular button and then it sends out email. So for sending out an email, if you are an Exchange web developer, you would have used EWS API, but because EWS Exchange web APIs are not available, services are not available, it is now part of Microsoft Graph. So we have MS Graph client available with it. Also, to authenticate with Microsoft Graph client, you would need something called Azure AD client. And this is where your deployment will come up, where you are giving certain kind of permissions to your Azure AD app. Then you could, in the similar way how you can have MS Graph client, you can also connect to different kind of web services and display that data. Okay. So now, many of you would be already following it. Okay. There are something called patterns and practices community call that happens every month. And some of the content, so I believe if you are following VESA, you would have heard that there is a document extensions also that came up. It was last minute, the day before yesterday, so I couldn't have a demo for that, but for everything else, I have a demo. So you can follow this, and this is a really good place to follow on SharePoint on what is happening and what is not happening. So then, we have also a GitHub facility where we have all the web parts available. In this particular web parts, what we have is different kinds of announcement web parts that you can actually use, and by going to HTTP SPDev starter kit to have this. So now when I have talked about, let me give up a demo. Demo of few of the things that we have talked about. And I have a virtual machine for it. So there were extensions that I was talking about, correct? And extensions looks like this. So there could be a normal value, which is 10, 50, but I can customize this particular list item in such a way that it gives me the row. And for that, we have written up a simple client. And the better part is I would just present. Okay. I'll show you the code. But then we also have something called command extensions. Now these, when you see Gulp Serve, these are the tools that I'm using to basically build it and run it. So it would run. While it is running, I really wanted to show you this. Okay, there are things like dynamic content that I've set up for you. Okay, if you click on this particular link, okay, yeah, this is the one. Okay, so if I'm clicking, so you see there is this particular web part is there with the maps web part, but it is not showing different kind of data. But when I'm checking it out, okay, then I see the data. And you would think that you are building this, you can build it with a dynamic, with different, just single web part. Why to build it with a different database, different web parts? Because you might want to arrange it in a different way. One could be that, but you might want to have that particular data web part available for a different functionality. And so if you can connect two data, okay, you could also build it for a different list which gives you the information. And you see how this map is loading and getting up the information. So then there is something called LOB app pages. So I'll just give you a demo on that. So you see that there is a difference between this dynamic web part where I have this particular command set, correct? And I can edit this particular page. But if you see on this app pages, I cannot edit it. And I do not have that comment section. Okay, so this is basically this is the one which is basically your app pages that you could have. You could only focus on the content that is available and not give all the UI to your users. Then is the notification. I hope this would clear this out for you. So now in notification, these are the features that we have. So here is one latest document functionality that I have created. Okay, and what I would do is, okay, I'll just go over here. I have this document section. Open it in a new page. And what I would do is I'll just click on new Word document, some sample. And if I come back, did I miss it? Notification. Now, if you see whenever I clicked it, automatically that document 2 is available. So instead of refreshing the page again and again, I just clicked on over there on the document, and because of the list subscription UI, correct? So we have list webhooks, okay? But that list webhooks with this UI lets me not refresh the whole page, but just refresh this particular page, okay? I would again show you how it works without, so the page is not refreshing, correct? I will bring it over here so that I can create up a document over here. So I'll just click on share documents and you just have a watch. Once I created up a document, automatically document 3 was added. Okay, so it is not refreshing the whole page, but it is refreshing that particular section itself. So that is about the list subscription and UI. Okay, so now that we have this, I wanted to show you something called, so whenever I install a particular web part, if it is installing from the client end, you would always get something called load debug scripts. And you see I have something called command 2 available. Okay, if I select this particular item, sorry, not select. If I just select this particular item, command 1 is also available. So this is basically you can do additional stuff like share it, or you already have share, but additional functionalities that could be related. So this is command 1 and command 2. So this is part of the extensions again. And now I would want to show you the feature where how you could actually debug SharePoint. So what we would do is we would actually go back and say Control C over here. Okay, before that, so I'll just go to one of the framework data. Now, remember I talked about how you do not have to use Azure for the CDN purpose. You can just use Office 365. So that is the next thing. So in Visual Studio Code, which is coming up, I believe, yeah. You can have different kinds of extensions available. And once you have different kinds of extensions, so like server code, now here is what I have installed called debug, okay? Where you can find the extensions for is, once you click over here, okay, you can click on debugger, and which is debugger for Chrome, and you can install it. Once you can install it, you can directly debug your code of SharePoint directly from here. So once you click over here, okay, and where is my file sets? So let's say I have this web part. Okay, sorry. I really should be installing that over here. Give me a second. It is getting difficult for me. Duplicate. Okay, good. Okay, so here if I go over here, I have this webpart.ts file. I can add a debugger over here directly. Let's say I've added up a debugger. And then if I go to debug, I can select local workbench or a hosted workbench. When I say workbench, you can see the web part directly how. So the concept of local workbenches, you would see how the web part looks and feels in your local environment also. But when you say hosted workbench, if you have some data connected to SharePoint and you want to get the context of it, you would not be able to get context because it is not connected to SharePoint. Something like user, you would not be able to. So that's why we have the hosted workbench also. So if I click on hosted workbench and I have the same program, when I click run, okay, it would automatically open that particular page for me. And before that, I would have to, in the terminal, I would have to say gulp serve, no browser, which will get my page started up. And here I can give my username. And the password. Once I click on this, you would see the workbench and failed stuff. Demo got. Okay, it's loading actually. Last one was the worst one. I kind of had a laptop crash, so it's still good. Yeah, it's just the page crash and the site is still working out. So if you know, the gulp serve basically is building up the project. And when I said -- no browser, that means the browser will not open up. If for others, if you would have remembered, whenever I said gulp serve, it would directly open and build that and open that in a particular web page. And did it start? Reload. Yeah. Okay, now let's start that in a local workbench. Or maybe come back to it. Okay, let's go to a different demo. We have 5 more minutes. We do have 5 more minutes, correct? No? It's already done? Okay, cool. Okay, so that was it, guys. Thank you so much. If you have questions, I didn't see about the time. But yeah, that was some of the coolest features like command sets. Mostly if you want to get started with developing, you could directly go to this particular page, which will actually set up your environment. So if you say just SharePoint framework and get started. Exactly this would help you out. And if you just go to getting started, here is a machine development environment which you can click and start with it. There is not much for it to start. It's just some of the React thing if you want to learn, or some Node.js that you would have to learn and Yeoman. So that was it. Thank you.